Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring some pretty interesting, I think, ideas about money. The kind of stuff you don't always hear in, those typical financial advice books.
Sounds intriguing.
It is, right? We're diving into Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. Have you had a chance to take a look?
I have, yeah. And I have to say, it really gets you thinking about those um, sometimes irrational ways we all deal with money.
Doesn't it? Like, we know we should be saving more or investing differently, but then our emotions or like past experiences kind of get in the way.
Totally. That's exactly what makes this book so different. It's not just about, crunching numbers. It's about understanding ourselves.
It's like he's saying, hey, money is personal.
Exactly. It is personal. And right off the bat, Housel throws this story at us about a tech genius, right? This guy helped design Wi-Fi router, so obviously brilliant.
Making a ton of money, I'd imagine.
Oh, yeah. But then he makes these, kind of bizarre financial decisions, like impulsive spending, showing off, almost like he's sabotaging himself.
So are you saying even super smart people can mess up their finances?
Oh, absolutely. It's like Housel's pointing out this big disconnect. You can be financially intelligent, know all the theory, but still have terrible financial behavior.
I see what you mean. It's kind of like knowing you should eat healthy, but then, still grabbing those donuts.
Perfect analogy. We all do it in some area of our lives.
So what's the takeaway here? Should we just throw out all the financial advice and just like focus on therapy?
No, not at all. But you need both. You need the knowledge, sure, but also the self-awareness to, actually use that knowledge wisely.
So we need to understand our own money psychology, our own quirks, our own, I guess, baggage.
Right. And that's what Housel digs into next. He says a lot of our money mindset, our financial outlook, comes from our personal experiences.
You mean like how we grew up?
Exactly. Think about it. Someone who lived through, let's say, hyperinflation, they'll probably view investments differently than someone who grew up with, stable prices.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Or like someone who went through the 2008 crash. They might be scared of the stock market even when things are good.
Exactly. Their past experiences become these mental filters, changing how they see risk, opportunity, the whole thing.
This makes me think, like, how much can we really learn from other people's financial success stories? I mean, someone who made a fortune in the 90s dot-com boom, can I just copy that today?
And that's where Housel brings in the concept of luck and risk. We often just focus on skill, on smarts, but luck plays a bigger role than we admit.
Like right place, right time, that kind of thing.
More than that, even. He talks about Bill Gates and his childhood friend, Kent Evans. Both brilliant, went to the same fancy high school. Gates becomes, Bill Gates Evans.
What happened?
Tragically died young. Mountain climbing accident. So, same starting point, vastly different outcomes.
Wow, I never thought of it like that. Makes you realize, like, how much is actually out of our control.
It definitely makes you pause. So it's not just about, work hard and you'll be rich. There's this element of chance we got to acknowledge.
So maybe success isn't just about the money, right? Maybe it's also about how you define enough.
And that's a key point. Housel uses this anecdote. It's from John Bogle, the Vanguard guy. Bogle knew this billionaire, puzzled by his friend, a writer, who seemed totally content with way less money.
So the writer had enough, even without being a billionaire.
Yeah, because his needs were met, his wants were simple. It's like Housel is saying we all play different games with money.
It's about finding your own version of enough, right? Not just chasing some number someone else decided on.
Exactly. In a world obsessed with more, that's a really tough but important lesson.
It is tough, but I think it's worth striving for. So we've got our behavior, our personal history, this element of luck. What else is going on in this psychology of money thing?
Well, get ready for this, because he tackles the big one, the thing everyone talks about, but few truly get. Compounding.
Compounding. Okay, that's the whole let your money grow over time thing, right?
More than that, Housel calls it the most powerful force in finance, but also the hardest to grasp. Because it needs patience. It needs that long-term view.
Okay, but how do you stay patient when, like, the market's going crazy and everyone wants to get rich now?
That's the challenge. He makes you imagine, what if Warren Buffett, the investing legend, started in his 30s, not as a kid?
His wealth would be way less, I'm guessing.
Way less. Time was the key, even for Buffett. Imagine the difference those extra decades made.
That's wild. So even if you're not, like, Warren Buffett, starting early matters, even with small amounts.
Massively. It's not just about being rich either. It's about that freedom, the flexibility that comes from having a solid financial base. It gives you options.
So even if I'm not trying to be a billionaire, this compounding thing still applies to me.
Absolutely. It's about delaying gratification, but not in a, punishing way. It's about Finding that balance between enjoying now and investing in your future.
It's like planting a tree, right? You got to be patient, but eventually you get shade, fruit, the whole thing.
Exactly. And that leads us to another key insight, leaving room for error.
Okay, room for error, I'm not sure I follow.
Think about it. Even the best plans, right? Job loss, illness, who knows what. Life happens, and we need to be prepared.
So you mean like having an emergency fund?
That's one way. Yeah, Housel uses this card counting analogy. Like, even when the odds are in your favor, you can't bet everything on one hand. You got to plan for being wrong sometimes.
That's an interesting way to put it. It's risk management, I guess. But how do you actually do that? Like, leave room for error in real life.
He gives the example of having enough cash so you don't have to sell stocks in a downturn. It might feel counterintuitive, but it can save you.
So sometimes holding cash is actually a good move.
The return on that cash is peace of mind, control, flexibility. You can't always measure that in dollars.
That's a good point. It's about making choices that feel right, even if they're not, like, perfectly optimized on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. And that brings up a really interesting point. Housel argues that maybe we shouldn't always aim to be perfectly rational with money.
Wait, you're telling me it's okay to be emotional about money?
Oh, emotions are part of who we are. Trying to be Mr. Spock about your finances, it can backfire.
I can see that. I've tried those super strict budgets, and they just make me feel trapped.
Right. Housel says aim for reasonable, not rational. He has this great example about a doctor who won a Nobel Prize for treating syphilis in a totally weird way.
Okay, what did he do?
He noticed patients with high fevers often got better, so he started intentionally giving people fevers.
You're kidding, right?
I know, sounds crazy, but it worked. The point is, sometimes the best solutions are the ones that factor in the emotional side of things, not just pure logic.
So sometimes it's okay to go with your gut.
Within reason, of course. You still need information, research. But trying to be perfectly rational, following some rigid plan, you might give up when it gets tough.
That's definitely happened to me. I'm more likely to stick with something if I actually, enjoy it.
And that brings us to something else Housel talks about, loving your investments. It's not just about chasing returns, but finding things you actually care about.
So you mean like if I'm really passionate about renewable energy, I should invest in companies doing that?
It's more about alignment. If you believe in what a company's doing, you'll be more likely to hold on through the ups and downs, the inevitable rough patches.
That makes sense. You're less likely to panic sell if you truly believe in the long-term vision.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where your head and your heart are both on board.
I like that. But before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, there's one more big idea from the book I want to touch on.
And that is,
Narrative. Housel talks about how our beliefs about the economy, about the markets, they have a huge impact on our choices, even if those beliefs are, not totally based on facts.
oh, absolutely. He uses this thought experiment. Imagine an alien visits Earth right after the 2008 crisis.
What would they see? I mean, the buildings are still standing, right? Life goes on.
Exactly, but everyone's freaking out about the economy. The alien wouldn't get it because they wouldn't have seen the shift in the narrative. The story we were telling ourselves about the financial system, that was the problem.
It wasn't just the actual numbers, it was how we interpreted them, right?
Exactly. It's like the power of stories. And it makes you realize we got to be aware of the narratives that are shaping our thinking about money.
Those narratives are everywhere, aren't they? On the news, social media, even from family and friends.
Which is why Housel says we need to be critical thinkers. Always question your assumptions. Be willing to change your mind as new information comes in.
So don't just blindly accept what you hear.
Exactly. Dig deeper. Challenge the status quo.
This is making me realize how much we need to, pay attention to what's going on in our own heads. Money is so tied to our emotions, our beliefs.
It is, and that's really the core of the psychology of money.
So much to think about. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
We have. There's a lot more to unpack. This whole thing about narratives and long-term thinking, it makes me think about something else. Housel talks about the power of saving money.
Saving. Okay, I'll admit it's not the most exciting topic, but I'm willing to hear you out. What's so powerful about saving?
He has this really cool way of looking at it. He compared saving to, finding more energy by needing less energy.
Okay, that's a new one. I never thought about it like that. So you're saying it's about, efficiency.
Yeah. It's like you're increasing your financial resources without having to actually, earn more money. You're just using what you have more wisely.
I see. It's like being smarter with your spending, not necessarily about depriving yourself.
Exactly. You get it. It's about making conscious choices like, do I need this or just want it? Housel says saving is powerful because it's something we can control, unlike, the stock market, which is unpredictable.
That's true. I can spend hours researching stocks, but there's always that element of risk. But saving, that's all on me.
Right. And it's not just about the practical side either. There are psychological benefits too,
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that. I'm all about the mental and emotional side of things.
Well, saving gives you this sense of security, like you've got a buffer. It reduces that pressure to constantly be chasing the next dollar.
Like a safety net, knowing you've got something to fall back on if, life throws a curveball.
Exactly. It's about feeling in control no matter what your income level is. He even says, past a certain point, what you need is just like what's below your ego.
Whoa. Okay, so it's not just about having enough money, but enough to satisfy your ego.
It's about aligning your spending with your values, resisting that urge to keep up with everyone else.
The whole keeping up with the Joneses thing, that's tough to resist sometimes.
It is, but it's so freeing when you can do it. And that kind of leads into another distinction Housel makes, rich versus wealthy.
Wait, those aren't the same thing. I thought they basically meant the same thing.
Not according to Housel. He says true wealth is what you don't see.
What you don't see, what does that even mean?
Like, it's not about the fancy car or the big house. It's about the financial assets you've built up, the things that are working for you behind the scenes.
He uses the example of Rihanna, right? I read that in the book, how she almost went broke early in her career because she's spending like crazy.
Yeah. Her financial advisor had to sit her down and be like, look, this is not how you build wealth. This is how you blow it all.
So it's about delaying gratification, resisting those impulses to splurge, and focusing on the long term.
Exactly. Building a solid foundation, even if it means making some sacrifices in the short term.
It's about being content with what you have, finding joy in the simple things, and investing in your future self.
Love that. And speaking of investing in your future self, Housel also has some surprising things to say about optimism and pessimism.
Optimism. When it comes to money, I always thought it was better to be a little pessimistic, like plan for the worst, hope for the best.
There's definitely wisdom in being prepared, but Housel says that while pessimism might sound smarter, optimism actually wins in the long run.
Okay, I got to hear how he justifies that. I mean, it's good to be realistic, right?
He gives this example from the energy industry. Back in 2008, remember, everyone was freaking out about peak oil.
Peak oil, yeah, vaguely, like we were running out of oil.
Right. Experts were saying we were hitting the limit of global oil production. Prices were skyrocketing. Everyone was panicking.
So what happened? Did we all end up driving horse-drawn carriages?
Nope. What happened was the high oil prices actually incentivized innovation. New technologies came along like fracking, and suddenly we had access to way more oil than we thought.
So the problem actually led to a solution. That's kind of amazing.
It is. It shows how human ingenuity, how we adapt, we solve problems, often in ways we couldn't have predicted.
So it's not about ignoring problems, it's about believing that we can find solutions. Having a little bit of faith in human ingenuity.
Exactly. And it applies to more than just technology. It's about our ability to adapt our behaviors, our systems, to meet the challenges of a changing world.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to money, honestly. Maybe I've been too focused on the potential downsides, the risks, the what-ifs. Maybe I need a little more optimism in my financial life.
I think a healthy dose of optimism is essential, as long as it's balanced with, a realistic understanding of potential risks.
Like that barbelled personality Housel talks about, right? Optimistic about the long term, but prepared for the inevitable bumps in the road.
Exactly. It's about balancing ambition with realism, recognizing that we can't control everything, but we can control how we respond.
This all ties back to those narratives we were talking about earlier. The stories we tell ourselves about money can be so powerful, even when they're not entirely true.
And that brings us to another really interesting part of the book. Housel takes us on a little journey through the history of American consumerism.
History. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. I always find it fascinating how the past shapes our present.
Well, imagine this. You wake up in, say, 2020, but you've been asleep for 75 years, like since 1945.
Wow, that's a long nap. I'd be pretty disoriented. What would I see?
Think about the changes, the technology, the economy, social norms, everything. And especially the way we think about money today, it's vastly different.
So how did we get from post-war America to where we are now? What happened in those 75 years?
Well, Housel starts by taking us back to the end of the World War II. The U.S. had this huge challenge. How do you reintegrate millions of soldiers into the workforce? How do you avoid another Great Depression?
I bet there was a lot of uncertainty back then. What did they do?
They innovated, adapted. Housel points out a few key things that fueled the post-war economic boom. First, interest rates were kept low. And there was this growing cultural acceptance of debt. This led to a surge in consumer spending.
I guess after years of wartime rationing and sacrifice, people were ready to buy stuff.
Exactly. Homes, cars, appliances, all the things that represented prosperity and, getting back to normal life.
And this spending created more jobs, more production, more money circulating.
Precisely. And during this period, the gains were shared more equally than ever before. It was a time of, Shared prosperity, the middle class was thriving.
So it really was like the American dream was working for a lot of
It
people.
was. And these expectations that were set during this boom, they've had a lasting impact on how we think about the economy, even as things have changed.
What do you mean changed? When did things start to shift?
Well, the first cracks in this post-war paradise started showing up in the 1970s. We had that recession in '73, high unemployment, inflation. It shook things up.
So that was the beginning of the end for this era of easy growth and shared prosperity.
Not quite the end, but things definitely started to shift. The economy kept growing, but the growth became more uneven. The gap between the rich and the poor started to widen.
This sounds like the story of rising inequality we've been hearing about for like decades now.
It is. And Housel argues that this gap, this disconnect between what we were promised, those post-war expectations, and the reality of how things are now, it's a big part of the unrest, the social and political tensions we see today.
He's talking about movements like Occupy Wall Street or the Tea Party, right? Both coming from different sides, but both fueled by the sense that the system isn't fair.
Exactly. And even the rise of someone like Donald Trump, you can see it as part of this trend. People feeling like the American dream is slipping away, looking for someone to blame.
It's like the economy isn't just about numbers, right? It's about people's lives, their hopes, their dreams, their sense of fairness.
And when that sense of fairness is gone, it leads to a lot of anger, a lot of frustration.
So this historical perspective, it helps explain why our relationship with money is so complicated. We're not just dealing with our own stuff, but also carrying the baggage of the past, you know?
Exactly. We're products of our history, both personal and collective. And that history shapes how we see the world, how we make decisions, how we feel about money.
I'm starting to see how it all connects. So what else did Housel say about this whole consumerism thing?
He talks about how the rise of consumer credit played a big role. Suddenly, it was easier than ever to buy things you couldn't afford, which led to, well, a lot of debt.
It's like a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, right? You get to enjoy things now, but then you're paying for it later, sometimes with interest.
Exactly. And this easy access to credit fueled the advertising industry, which got really good at, manipulating our desires, making us think we need all this stuff we don't actually need.
It's crazy how much our spending habits are influenced by things we're not even aware of.
Which is why being self-aware is so important. We need to understand our own triggers, our vulnerabilities, and develop strategies to, resist those impulses.
So be a mindful consumer. Ask yourself, do I really need this before you buy anything?
Exactly. It's about making conscious choices that are aligned with your values, your long-term goals.
So it's not about never buying anything fun. It's about being intentional with your spending.
Exactly. And that brings us to another big topic. Housel tackles, the one that makes a lot of people nervous, investing. But he does it in a way that's actually, understandable.
Investing. Yeah, that's definitely an area where I need some help. I get so overwhelmed by all the options, the jargon, the ups and downs of the market. Sometimes I just want to hide my money under a mattress.
I think a lot of people feel that way. But Housel reminds us that it doesn't have to be so complicated or scary. It's about understanding the basics, aligning your investments with your goals, and being patient.
Okay, so what are the basics? Where do I even start?
Well, he talks about diversification. That means spreading your investments across different things like stocks, bonds, real estate, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, that makes sense. Don't want it all riding on one company or one, crazy market swing.
And he stresses the importance of, the long game. Invest for the long term, ride out the ups and downs, let that compounding magic work its thing.
So it's not about trying to time the market perfectly or pick the next hot stock. It's about choosing a strategy and sticking with it.
He also warns against chasing those high returns or, getting caught up in the hype. Sometimes the best investments are the boring ones.
Boring, like what? Savings accounts?
Not quite. He's talking about things like index funds. They track the overall performance of the market, and they tend to be pretty steady and predictable.
Okay, so not as exciting as buying Bitcoin, but maybe a better strategy for the long haul.
Exactly. And he also stresses the importance of keeping your fees low. Over time, those fees can really eat into your returns.
This is starting to make investing seem a little less intimidating, like I could actually do this.
That's the spirit. Housel does a great job of demystifying it and making it feel more approachable. And here's another key point he makes. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to investing.
Okay, so how do I figure out what the right approach is for me?
He uses the example of Google stock. The right price to pay for Google today depends entirely on your individual situation.
So someone who's 25 years old, they might be willing to pay more than someone who's, about to retire.
Exactly. Your age, your risk tolerance, your goals, your whole philosophy about money. It all factors in.
So it's not about blindly following some expert's advice or copying what worked for someone else.
Right. You got to do your own research, Figure out what makes sense for you and make decisions that you feel good about. He says define your own financial philosophy, one that's grounded in your values and your understanding of yourself.
That's actually really empowering. It's like I'm in control. I get to decide what success looks like for me.
That's the whole point, understanding the psychology of money. It's about so much more than just learning about financial concepts. It's about understanding yourself.
It's like money is a mirror, reflecting back our own beliefs, our habits, our fears.
Exactly. And the more honest we are with ourselves about those things, the better decisions we can make.
So financial success isn't just about having a lot of money, it's about having a healthy relationship with money.
Beautifully said. It's about using money as a tool to create the life you want, not letting it control you.
This has been so eye-opening. I'm looking at money in a whole new way now.
That's what we like to hear. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn, more to explore.
So we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Personal history, narratives, saving, investing, even like a crash course in economic history.
It's amazing how much there is to say about money when you start looking at it through this psychological lens.
It is, right? And it's not just about the numbers, it's about like who we are as people.
And I think that's a key takeaway from the psychology of money. Success with money, it's not really about, being a genius or anything. It's more about how you behave.
So it's not about having some super high IQ. It's about understanding your own like quirks, your tendencies, the things that might trip you up.
He really emphasizes that long-term thinking, that's what matters. Building wealth, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
And that brings us back to compounding, right? Like patience really is key, but it's hard to stay focused on the long term when, everything is so instant these days.
It is tough. But think about it this way. What if you had that financial freedom, that flexibility to make choices based on what you value, not just based on what you can afford at this moment?
That would be amazing. To not feel so stressed about money all the time, to be able to like pursue your passions, spend time with your family, without constantly worrying about the bills.
Exactly. And that starts with knowing what game you're playing. What are your goals? What does success look like for you? Once you know that, your financial decisions become so much clearer.
So it's not about keeping up with like some imaginary standard of wealth. It's about figuring out what truly matters to you.
He also warns about those, get-rich-quick schemes, the real path to wealth. It's usually pretty slow, pretty steady, and honestly, kind of boring.
It's like building a house, right? Brick by brick, slow and steady wins the race.
Perfect analogy. And just like building a house, you got to plan for those unexpected things, those storms that might come along.
And that's where his point about accepting mistakes comes in, right? Like you're going to mess up sometimes. It's part of the process.
Exactly. Build in a margin of safety. Have a backup plan. Know that you can handle those curveballs without having to completely give up on your goals.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about being prepared.
And having the right mindset. Remember that barbelled personality. Be optimistic about the future, but also have a healthy dose of paranoia about what could go wrong.
It's like walking that tightrope between hope and caution, believing in the best but preparing for the worst.
It's finding that balance, ambition with realism. We can't control everything, but we can control how we react.
This all leaps back to those narratives we were talking about, the stories we tell ourselves about money, about success, about risk. They can really mess with our heads.
They can, which is why you got to be a critical thinker. Question those stories, look at the evidence, and then make up your own mind.
Don't just blindly accept what you hear, right?
Exactly. Do your own research. Think for yourself.
I'm really seeing how important self-awareness is. The more you know about yourself, your habits, your biases, the better decisions you'll make.
Absolutely. We're not always rational. Our emotions, our past, the stories we've been told, it all influences us.
So if I could distill this whole deep dive into one piece of advice, it would be get to know yourself, really understand your relationship with money.
That's a great starting point. And as you go, remember to be kind to yourself. You're going to make mistakes. We all do.
It's about learning, right? And remembering that money, it's just a tool. It's up to us to decide how we use it.
I love that. Money is a tool. We get to decide how it fits into our lives.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive. Thank you so much for joining me today.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you found this exploration of the psychology of money as insightful and as thought-provoking as we have. Remember, as Morgan Housel says, ask yourself, if you could go back and give your younger self just one piece of financial advice, what would it be and why? Until next time, happy diving.